Good evening, YouTube. This is Mike, and I'm back for Movies from A to Z. This is Monday. Actually, it's almost Tuesday. It's pretty late. So I did a video earlier for this particular topic, and I didn't like it, so I decided not to use it. So I'm starting all over again. And I'd like to get it done before the deadline, before the clock strikes 12. Okay. Anyway. So before I start out with the film for tonight, I'd like to give you a little bit of an update. I went to one of my local used video stores today, and I just picked up 4 items. I'd like to show you what they are. The first is a film called A Letter to Three Wives from 1949. This is produced and directed and written by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who a year later would do All About Eve. And this has a great cast of actresses. It has Jean Crane, Linda Darnell, Ann Southern, and it also has Kirk Douglas. Never seen this, so I'm anxious to get into it. I picked up a copy of To Catch a Thief, Alfred Hitchcock, Mr. Cary Grant, and Princess Grace. And I've seen this only a couple of times. I picked up the original version of Far from the Madding Crowd from 1967, I believe, directed by John Schlesinger. And it stars Julie Christie, Terrence Stamp, Peter Finch, Alan Bates. And I've never seen this, but I did see the remake about, a couple years ago, and really liked it. So, and don't laugh when I show you this one. I bought the entire Tammy series, okay? Tammy and the Bachelor, starring Debbie Reynolds and Leslie Nielsen before he became the king of comedy. And the 2 sequels starring Sandra Dee. I love Sandra Dee. She's beautiful. Tammy Tell Me True with John Gavin, and Tammy and the Doctor with Peter Fonda, before Peter Fonda became an easy rider. All right, so tonight's movie for the letter M is a terrific classic film from 1932 released by Warner Brothers called The Man Who Played God, starring an actor named George Arliss, who at the time was 63 years old. He had been a star of the theater and silent films for a very long time, and also he had directed. He was a writer, very well respected, distinguished man who was doing pretty well in sound films, even though he was nothing like a handsome, debonair leading man type at all, but he was very, very popular. So he did this movie at Warner Brothers, and in the film he plays a concert pianist, a very famous and very talented and wealthy man who is loved by millions of people, especially women. His name is Montgomery Royal, and he is called Monty by his friends. And he's never been married, but he has a very close friend named Mildred, played by an actress named Violet Hemming, who has, well, at one time they were almost married, and it didn't work out. And she has kind of secretly been in love with him all these years, but they are very, very good, very, very good friends. Monty is actually having a sort of a romance with a much younger woman named Grace Blair, played by an actress named Bette Davis, who is getting her big start at Warner Brothers with this film. So it's kind of a very much a May-December romance, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to believe that this beautiful young woman, because Bette Davis is made up to look very beautiful in this film, would be attracted to this older man. But she does sincerely love the man and respect him greatly. So they make it believable, the two of them, by their talent. So, all right. So at the beginning of the film, this concert pianist is giving a concert in Paris. And after the concert is over, he and all of his friends are back in the dressing room, and they're going to be meeting this monarch, a king from an unspecified European country, who wants to meet this pianist and have him play for him in private. So he meets the king, and he's playing the piano. Now this king has some enemies, and some of these enemies have decided to try to kill the king by placing a bomb near this building. And so the bomb goes off, no one is hurt. The king is fine, everybody else is fine, but the sound from the explosion makes Monty go deaf immediately. Now we find out that there is sort of an inherited condition in his family where a lot of people have gone deaf, and he was always afraid that it might happen to him later on in life. He's made it to the age of 53. In this film, he's even though he's 63 years old, George Arliss, he's playing a man who's 10 years younger. And so he's made it to this age without having that congenital condition, but the explosion makes him deaf immediately, and he does not recover. So he becomes very angry and bitter. He no longer plays his music because he can't hear it. It's not just the love of creating the music, but he loved hearing music. And he's very, very bitter, and he becomes a recluse. And he also becomes very angry at God. Now, before this happened, he was a very religious Christian, kept a Bible in his dressing room, and he begins to curse God. Now, it's interesting that this is a pre-code film that may not have been accepted by the censors a few years down the line when the censors were much more strict, because he says a lot of very anti-Christian things. So you can tell this man is very, very angry. Well, as time goes on, someone convinces him that he should learn how to read lips so that he can at least communicate with people who are trying to speak to him. He does this. He ends up learning how to do it very well, and it does improve his life somewhat. Does not take away his anger and his resentment and his bitterness toward God. However, he finds that from his high-rise apartment, he can look out the window at a park across the street, and with binoculars, he can actually read the lips of what people are saying, which is pretty amazing because he's that talented at lip reading. But he starts getting involved in these people's lives from his vantage point, and it's kind of a soap opera. But he gets very concerned about what some people are saying about needing money for rent or for food or for some sort of a medical emergency. And he decides that he can actually do something worthwhile. He can help these people. He's very wealthy. He sends his butler down to some of these people to anonymously give them money. And of course, they're very grateful. And he has kind of a cynical attitude about what he's doing. He thinks that he's doing the kinds of things that God himself should be doing, instead of being cruel as he was in making him go deaf. So he finds himself playing God, and at first he is very, very cynical about it, but as time goes on, his attitude starts to change, and therefore his life starts to change. Well, I've told you more than enough about the plot. I hope that at least makes you interested in wanting to see it. Now, let's see. George Arliss lived until 1946. He did make some films after this, and he and Bette Davis would work together again the following year at Warner Brothers in another film called The Working Man, a film that I haven't seen, but it's on my bucket list of Bette Davis films that I want to get. So let's talk about Bette Davis. Now, she had come to Hollywood in 1930. She had a career on Broadway, which was going fairly well. She was getting a lot of attention for some of the plays that she had been in. Now, of course, during these early years of sound films, all of the studios were trying to find actors who could speak well as look good in front of a camera. And of course, she had a beautiful voice and perfect diction. She had already done a screen test for the Samuel Goldwyn Company back in New York, and that didn't work out. She was then invited to come out to Hollywood to audition for Universal Studios. So she did, and she got that contract. So that was in 1930. And in the years 1931, 1932, she made 6 films under that contract. The first 3 were made at Universal Studios. The second 3 were all loan outs to lower budget studios for lower budget films, which indicated that Universal was losing interest in her very quickly. And indeed, when these 6 films were done, they did not renew her contract. So Bette Davis was actually packing up and getting ready to go back to New York and trying to resume her career on the stage when she got a phone call from George Arliss, and he invited her to come to Warner Brothers and audition for this film. Apparently, an actor that he knew who had worked with Bette Davis in one of these low-budget films had recommended her for this part, so George Arliss was willing to give her a chance. So Bette Davis thought this was a friend of hers playing a joke, so she started making fun of George Arliss's very distinguished accent and trying to play along with what she thought was a joke. And after about 5 attempts, to convince her, Miss Davis, this is George Arliss, she finally was convinced. And she was in awe that this great man would actually call her and want her to work with him. So she did go to Warner Brothers. She got the part, and she did very well. And as a result, she was put under contract to Warner Brothers and stayed there for almost the next 18 years. And, of course, the rest is Hollywood history. She had a great, great career in films. Now, let me tell you what George Arliss said about Bette Davis and working with her in The Man Who Played God. I've got this wonderful book here called Mother Goddamn, which was written by a man named Whitney Stein, who's a very good friend of Bette Davis's. And she takes part in this by, well, Whitney Stein is going through every film that Bette Davis ever made, and underneath his words are responses and comments by Bette Davis herself. And so it's really a lot of fun to read. I've had this for a long, long time. It's turning yellow. So this is what George Arliss said in his autobiography. I think that only 2 or 3 times in my experience have I ever got from an actor at rehearsal something beyond what I realized was in the part. Bette Davis proved to be one of those exceptions. I knew she had a nice little part, important to me, so I hoped for the best. I did not expect anything except a nice little performance. But when we rehearsed, she startled me. The nice little part became a deep and vivid creation, and I felt rather humbled that this young girl had been able to discover and portray something that my imagination had failed to conceive. She startled me because, quite unexpectedly, I got from her a flash that illuminated mere words and inspired them with passion and emotion. That is the kind of light that cannot be hidden under a bushel, and I am not the least surprised that Bette Davis is now the most important star on the screen. And her comment underneath that quote is, "Thank you, dear, kind George Arliss." Okay? All right, so that's my commentary on The Man Who Played God, and I hope that you would like to take a chance to see this. By the way, one little trivial point, and that is that there's a young actor who plays a very small and uncredited part in The Man Who Played God, and his name is Ray Milland, and you cannot mistake that that distinctive voice, that very handsome face. So if you see this movie, keep an eye out for Ray Milland. He's only in it for a few minutes. So, all right, thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you've seen this film, and all comments are welcome.